going to start recording in just a moment. Remember, you can always, if you miss a shiur, I always give you a link in the Parsha sheet, or you can go on YouTube and you can go into the Ohel Ari or BKOE, Beit Knesset Ohel Ari Zoom room or website, and you'll find the shiurim there from past weeks. We're going to dedicate tonight's shiur to the memory of Aaron Yehuda ben Moshe, Zichrono Livracha, who is commemorating his yortzeit. The neshama should have an aliyah from our learning. A couple of public service announcements. Next week we will not meet because next Thursday night is Purim. So I think you have other things to do that are equally important. And just watch for the times, because I think in 2 weeks we'll have to adjust the time a bit in order to accommodate Mincha and Marv. And so we'll keep you posted on that, either by WhatsApp or on the Parsha sheet. And then maybe after that, in 3 weeks' time or so, we may be able to go back to an earlier time, which will not conflict. And I don't know if that's good or not good for you, but we're kind of bound by the times of Mincha Marv. All right, since this coming week is going to be Purim, and as I said, we won't be able to meet Thursday night, which is Purim, right after Megillat Esther, or for some of you, it is right after Tanit Esther, slicha. For some of you, it will be Tanit Esther. But I want to talk about Esther and what I sometimes called Esther's Dilemma, Princess or Prisoner, or the triumph and tragedy of Queen Esther, a little bit beneath the text to try to have a deeper understanding of what is going on Purim. This is a classic Disney story. In fact, I'm convinced that Aladdin, which is one of the great Disney movies, was taken from Megillat Esther. It's got all the same ingredients. It's got the beautiful princess or queen. It's got the nefarious villain who manipulates the king. It's got this horrendous plot against, in our case, against the Jewish community of Persia, and then a reversal of fortune, and the good guys win and the bad guys lose. So it comes off like such a delightful fairy tale with a happy ending, you would think. And that's probably why, it's one of the reasons why it is so popular, especially in Israel, with Purim parades and Purim masquerade parties, etc. And of course, that adds to the whole allure, the dressing up and the pomp and circumstance. Everybody loves royalty. But I always ask the question, how would this play in real time in Bnei Brak or Mea Shearim? Religious Jewish girl somehow gets hooked up with vicious anti-Semite and goes on to participate in a forbidden marriage, is intermarried and perhaps assimilated, and yet she is hailed as a great hero. I'm always just amazed that in these, in Stamford Hill and in Golders Green and in Mea Shearim, we are just going gaga over Esther. But what if one of their daughters did the same exact thing and married a non-Jew and stayed married to a non-Jew? I'm not sure they would be having parties for it, but that's what happens here. And we want to try to kind of go a little bit deeper into this story, because it may not be the fairy tale, the idyllic fairy tale we think it is. First of all, let's understand something that I think a lot of people get wrong, maybe because of these Disney stories. Akhashverosh is not a genial, multiculturalist lover of Jews. The Gemara says that Akhashverosh is as bad as Haman, and indicates that by telling us that when Haman tries or wants to bribe Akhashverosh to sign on or allow his genocidal plot against the Jews, Akhashverosh says to him, why would I take money for something that I want to happen myself? You're doing me a favor. I don't want the Jews around any more than you do. And the Gemara gives this example of, there are two people. One needs a hole to be dug, and the other one needs the dirt. So when they get together, they say, hey, let's make a deal. I need the hole, you need the dirt. Great, we're both happy. And that's essentially who Akhashverosh is. He's also not a genteel, let us say, sophisticated king. First of all, he's a commoner who became king. And that's part of the backdrop. His only connection to royalty was his ex-wife, Vashti, who was Nebuchadnezzar's granddaughter. So, and that's part of the story, which we're not going to go into, but it also is part of the hidden agenda there of Haman, who considers himself royalty because he proclaims he's related to King Agag, who in this week's Haftorah, Shmuel actually does away with when Shaul fails to kill him. But he's royalty, and he would like to be king as well. But I'm not going to go there because we've got other things to discuss. But Akhashverosh is not the kind of person that a nice Jewish girl would want to be marrying. And I'll tell you a little midrashic tidbit here. Mordechai saves the life of Akhashverosh when he overhears the plot by two of the royal guards, Bigtan and Teresh, who want to assassinate Akhashverosh. Mordechai is a member of the Sanhedrin. He speaks 70 languages. So even though they speak in a language they think nobody understands, he does understand it. And he tells the people in the palace about it. And Akhashverosh is saved, and that's why later on he'll be rewarded, etc. Why did they want to assassinate Akhashverosh? Says the Midrash something pretty stunning. They were on night duty, and basically they thought, this is a cushy job. We'll be outside, the king's quarters, and basically it's the middle of the night. We can sleep ourselves. Nothing happening now. But they couldn't sleep because Akhashverosh's, let us say, sexual activity on a nightly basis was so loud and raucous that they couldn't get any sleep at all. And they finally said, we got to do away with this king. I mean, it sounds a little far-fetched, but it tells us a little bit, it's the Medrash, but it tells us a little bit about who Akhashverosh was and makes it seem rather incongruous that somebody like Esther would be with him. Okay, so, you will tell me that she was taken by force. And we have a principle in Judaism, ones rachmana patre, that when something happens to you out of your control, God forgives you for it. That's all true. But we still can ask the question that if Esther being with Akhashverosh was something that's so inimical, something so anti-Judaism, then she should have done whatever needs to be done in order to avoid that situation. Now, this is compounded many times if you accept the Gemara's opinion, and it is the accepted opinion, the majority opinion, that not only was she Mordechai's niece, but she was also married to Mordechai, where it says, Vayikach lo lebat, he took her in as a daughter. The Gemara says, Al tikra lebat, ela lebait, not as a daughter, but as a wife. Ishto zabeto, we say a man's house is his wife, or his wife is his house, etc. And so the Gemara says they were married. So here now you have a married Jewish woman with Akhashverosh. Yes, it was not something she did willingly yet, but nevertheless, she had an option, perhaps. She could have killed herself because, contrary to what many people think, who think that there are three cardinal sins for which you have to commit martyrdom, Gila Arayot, which is like incest, immoral situations, Shvichat Dami, murder or idolatry, there's a fourth. And the fourth is what we call Chilul Hashem. And if God forbid someone's in a situation of Chilul Hashem, the desecration of God's name, you are commanded to give up your life. So why doesn't Esther give up her life rather than be in this situation? So Chazal, the Gemara, the rabbis are very, very concerned with trying to find some reason, some justification for her staying in this relationship that she has with Akhashverosh. And there are any number of Talmudic sources, and I'll give you a few of them, that try to rationalize Esther being there. Okay? I mean, the one that we would think of first is, well, she needs to be in that situation in order to save the Jews. Okay, but let's understand that that only comes later. As a matter of fact, I want to tell you another tidbit that you might have overlooked. There was a beauty contest. Esther was crowned the queen after Vashti lost her head. So what good would a crown do her when she doesn't have a head? So Esther becomes the new queen. But did you know that there's a second beauty contest? You may have kind of glossed over that, but it's in your Megillah. What's the deal with that? Well, I'll tell you what the deal with that is. Akhashverosh wanted to find out who Esther is. She's very mysterious. She won't tell. Nothing he does can get the information out of her. So what does he do? He goes to his trusted advisor. He goes to Mordechai. Believe it or not, despite the fact that he has no great love for the Jews, he has Jewish advisors. That's not surprising either. Look at Ferdinand and Isabella. They certainly weren't very good to the Jews, but Don Isaac Abarbanel, or Abravanel, however you pronounce it, there's two ways. He was their advisor, and you see this all over the place. You see popes who had Jewish advisors. So he goes to Mordechai and he says, what can I do to convince Esther to tell me who she is? I mean, the name Esther means hidden, right? So, that's not her real name. He doesn't even know her real name. So Mordechai says, you know what you should do? You should hold a second beauty contest. There's nothing that makes a woman more, shall we say, pliable than jealousy. And if they're jealous that somebody else might take the crown and might take their place, maybe then she'll give in to you and she'll tell you who she is. But Mordecai's hidden agenda in this was the hope that she would lose that second beauty contest and be released from his harem so that none of these problems would go on. He's also ambivalent. There's a lot of ambivalency here. Unfortunately for him, she wins the second beauty contest as well, and therefore she stays on as queen. So you see, he's not so wild about it in the beginning either, although later on he'll make that impassioned speech. Who knows, if not for this, you were put into the position of queen, etc. So the rabbis try to rationalize, how can she stay in this relationship? So first they say, Chil Hashem, desecration of God's name, needs to be done if it publicly, and publicly would be in front of 10 Jews or more. That's number one. We see this right in the stories of Hanukkah, where you have the story where you have Elazar, who is told that he has to eat non-kosher food, but it's done in front of the Jewish public, so that would desecrate God's name, that a Jew is going against Judaism and maybe being a bad influence on other Jews. And here we see that what she was doing was not in front of 10 Jews. So maybe that's a reason to say that it's not really Chilul Hashem. Then there's another opinion, famous comment, Esther Karka Olam, that yes, Esther was with Akhashverosh. She had intimate relations with him, but she got no pleasure from it. She was Karka Olam, like the ground of the earth. And because she, in that way, she didn't participate actively in it. And so that is a justification for her not killing herself. Then there is another opinion that makes a lot of sense to us, and that is that Akhashverosh did not know she was Jewish. And indeed, that may be one of the reasons that Mordechai says, don't tell you're Jewish, because as long as he doesn't know you're Jewish, there can be no Chil Hashem. Chil Hashem is when something is directed specifically, in a way to mock God and the Jewish people and our observance of the commandments. But if he doesn't know you're Jewish, then it has no bearing on any kind of Chilul Hashem. And therefore, she keeps her lineage secret. Then there is another opinion, and this is a very, very difficult concept called Avera Lishma. The Gemara says in Nazir, Daf Chav Gimel, that Gedola Avera Lishma be mitzvah shelo lishma. A sin done for a good reason, in many ways, or it may be greater than a mitzvah that is not done for a good reason. It's hard to translate lishma, but let's use that translation. So sometimes the sin you do may be more meritorious than the mitzvah you do. The example given by the Gemara, and in several places, is the example of Yael and Sisera. We read about this just a few weeks ago in the Haftorah, in the battle with Devorah and Barak, right, on Har Tavor. And as part of that battle, Yael entices Sisera to come into her tent. She's a married woman, by the way. And ultimately, she's going to get him to sleep and cut off his head. And this is going to be a major blow to the enemy and helpful to Devorah and Barak winning that battle. The only problem is that the Gemara says that A, she was married, and B, that Sisera had intercourse with her no less than 7 times while he was in that tent. And I'm not going to comment any further on that, only to say that it's certainly not something that we would consider a meritorious act on the surface. But the Gemara says because she did it for the right reason, to help Am Yisrael win that battle, that is a classic case of Avera Lishma, and she is commended. And we know that the name Yael, and again, we vote with our feet. You see how many Jewish girls are named Yael? Many. And she's a heroic character. So the Gemara says, well, maybe that's the story with Esther. What she's doing is clearly a sin, but not something we would encourage or even condone or allow, but it was done for a higher purpose, and therefore it's okay. Now, this is a very dangerous philosophy because a lot of people will condone a lot of sins by saying, well, I'm doing it for a good reason, lishma. And it's a very, very slippery slope. And I think you can understand that yourself, that you can basically justify and rationalize any sin and call it something done for a good and higher purpose, whether it's embezzlement or rape or who knows what. So it's obviously controversial. But this becomes even more pronounced when Mordechai says to Esther, I need you to go, I need you to go and plead for the survival of the Jewish people. Esther is going to have to risk her life. She's not been called upon. This is kind of an unauthorized meeting with Akhashverosh. She tries to get out of it. And the reason, and she has this, famous phrase, which we say in the Echatun, Kasher avadati, avadati, kasher avadati, avadati. Why in the Echatun? Because she says, this is crossing the red line. When I was forced to go and be with Akhashverosh, okay, there's lots of excuses, but now I am voluntarily going to see him. And, this isn't a social visit. When you go to see Akhashverosh, it's not just for tea and crumpets. She knows and understands that there will be sexual activity. And that's why she says essentially to Mordechai, how can I do it? Until now, I've been forced, and as we said, ones rachmana patre, but once I go voluntarily, then in a sense, on top of everything else, I'll be committing adultery. And then I will be forbidden to ever come back to you, because that's the halacha. If you, of your own choice, a married woman, has sexual relations with someone else while married, has an affair, she can't go back to her husband, without getting deeply into that halachic issue. But that's the basic law. And therefore she says, just as I have been lost to my family and orphaned, I'll now be lost to you. And of course, the truth is that she never does go back to Mordechai. She stays with Akhashverosh all the way through, because they will have a child. And that's really the essential backdrop to this story, and the reason why we even care about what happened and include it in Tanakh, because they'll have a child, Darius II. And that's Esther and Akhashverosh's son. And he will reinstate the order of Cyrus to allow for the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash, an order that Vashti, Nebuchadnezzar's granddaughter, had stopped and told Akhashverosh, you can't let the Jews do that. My grandfather destroyed the Beit HaMikdash and you're going to allow them to rebuild it? But Esther's son, Darius II, will. In any case, this truly complicates matters, because, and Esther feels that, and yes, Mordechai gives his impassioned speech, but she understands and senses that this is really a tragic decision. And of course, we know what happens in the story. And we think it all ended up happily, but it ain't necessarily so. Let's try to come to grips with this by asking one of the most classic questions of the Megillah that everybody asks, and the Gemara asks in great detail, and says, okay, we understand why Esther is arranging a party when she's going to unveil, so to speak, and she's going to beg the king for salvation from Haman. And she actually makes two parties, and she's going to get him in a good mood, and he's going to be, wined and dined. And then she's going to pop the question, will you help me, and will you save me from this and my people from this plot? But why does she invite Haman? Gemara says, I understand what's going on here, but why would she possibly invite Haman to the same party? So the Gemara gives half a dozen answers. First of all, Rav Yossi says that she invited Haman so that he will be present when this revelation unfolds, so that if things go Esther and Mordechai's way, and Akhashverosh agrees to save the Jews and do away with Haman, he'll be right there. Because if he's not there, as we said before, he was all the time plotting a coup. And, if he hears about it, he could assemble his own militia and he could kill the king. But if it happens right there in the palace where the king's guards are, he can take care of Haman, which, of course, indeed is what he does. Rab Nehemiah has a very fascinating answer to this question. He says that Esther invited Haman, and I'll read the words of the Gemara, Kedei shelo yomru Yisrael, achot yesh lanu bebeit hamelech, v'yasichu da'atan min harachamim. Says Esther, I can't do this alone. I need to have the people with me. And indeed, that's why we have the fast of Esther. She fasted, the people fasted, she told them to pray. She said, this is going to have to be a combined effort if I'm going to succeed. And therefore, she says, I don't want the Jews, the community, to think they have a sister in the palace, that this is a no-brainer. Esther's there. She'll take care of everything. So she invites Haman so that the community who knows that this plot is afoot, that the community may say, what's going on here? Why is Haman invited? Maybe Esther is cutting her own deal so that she can be saved, but we'll still be wiped out. And therefore, very cleverly, as says Rabbi Nehemiah, Esther is doing this in order to keep the Jewish community nervous enough so that they will continue to pray for themselves and not necessarily depend on Esther. Maybe she's gone the other way. She's maybe siding with the enemy. We better pray to Hashem to be saved. But it's this final reason of Rav Yeshua ben Karcha that I think really sums all of this up. He says quite a stunning thing. Says Rav Yeshua ben Karcha, she invited Haman for one reason. Asvir lo panim kedei sheyarog hu vahi. Says Esther, I'm inviting Haman so that asvir lo panim means, in the old days we'd say, Mom, he's making eyes at me, goo eyes. I'm going to make these eyes at Haman. Maybe it's a wink, a nod, something to make Akhashverosh think that Haman and I have something going on behind his back. So the result will be he'll kill Haman, because you don't mess with the king's queen. You know that we see that in history. We see that in way by David HaMelech and Abishag. You don't tamper with the queen. So he'll kill Haman, thus saving the Jewish people, and then he'll kill me. And then everything will be right. My people will be saved, and I will be dead, because I don't want to stay alive. I don't deserve to stay alive under these. It's the death penalty for what I've done. And I don't want to stay married to Akhashverosh. And that's her plan. And that's why she invites Haman as well. It's a stunning statement, but it really sums up what we've been saying. In the end, of course, it doesn't happen that way. Thankfully, Haman is killed. And indeed, that's why you have that little incident there where when he walks out, the king, Haman, prostrates himself on the bed, on the royal couch with Esther, so that Akhashverosh comes back and says, oh, now you want to take my queen as well, or attack my queen, and then that pushes him over the edge and he has Haman killed. But he doesn't do anything to Esther. She continues on because that's what Hashem wants and needs to happen, for her to continue being married to Akhashverosh in order to produce this child who will, in a sense, justify this relationship and having this story in the Tanakh at all, because as we may know, once we went into Israel, no event that happens in Chutz La'aretz is worthy of being included in Tanakh or of eternal value. But because this connects to Israel and connects to the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash and coming back from exile in Bavel, the rabbis felt, after much pleading by Esther, because she pleads that this story be included. In the beginning, they didn't want to. Number one, because, as I said, how it's going to play in Bnei Brak, a nice Jewish girl intermarrying and having relations with this king. And also because it has to connect somehow to Israel. And they conclude ultimately, Esther, you're right, it's worthy of being read every year till the end of time. Some people say that Purim is the only Chag that will remain after Moshiach comes. Some say Purim and Hanukkah. There are different opinions. We'll find out when Moshiach comes tomorrow. But they do agree that it can be included. And this, again, is the way Hashem orchestrated things to turn out. But for her, it's triumph and tragedy all rolled into one. And in many ways, we've talked about this before, Esther is emblematic of all the great Jewish women, really, in Tanakh, who most of them have this combination of triumph and tragedy. You see it by Sarah, who goes through 90 years of not having a child, and then even after Yitzchak's born, dies in shock at the Akedah. We see this by Rivka, who very heroically orchestrates the Bechorah, but then dies alone. And we see it by Rachel, who dies young in childbirth and is not buried with Yaakov. There's much to say about Leah as well. And you see it by Hannah, who finally has his child and then gives him over to be to serve in the Mishkan, and essentially leaves her forever as a young child. And on and on and on, with so many different stories about the great women who engage in what we've said before is one of the true definitions of Kedusha, or of being a tzaddik, as we said with Yosef, and that is Mesirat Nefesh, sacrificing that which is important to you and which you deserve for a greater good. And that's exactly what Esther does. And part of the reason, I think, why she is such a beloved character, why so many Jewish girls are named Esther, in spite of all the reasons we gave at the beginning, in spite of this rather uncomfortable story of what she did, but nevertheless, eternally will be one of our most beloved and respected personalities in all of Tanakh. But it's not so simple, as we've seen. It's not something easily explicable. And she herself, at least according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, she understood that, and she believed that maybe the better ending would be that she disappears from the scene as well. But of course, it was not to be, and things turn out the way they turn out. But she still deserves our undying thanks and respect. And hopefully we will achieve, and we see this often in Jewish history, that the path to Moshiach, the path to ultimate glory, goes through some very unsavory places. That's another shiur for another time, which hopefully we'll do. But this is just another example that it's not lily white. It's not the way you would write the story, but it's the way Hashem writes, not only writes the story, but directs, produces the story, and makes sure that it comes true the way that he wants it to. And I will stop there. Yes, I know there's some good comments on on the chat. I can't really go through all of those. Yes, I know there's a controversy about Yael. Was she Jewish? Wasn't she Jewish? But we still consider her one of ours.
Are we allowed to ask questions?
Yes, let's ask a question or two. Yes.
Okay,
please.
so I have a question. What you said that Mordechai requested the second beauty contest.
Yes.
Does it say that in the Megillah? Who says that?
No, that's the commentary on where that came about. It says in the Megillah that there was a second beauty contest held, but the backdrop, according to the Meforshim, is that was at the advice of Mordechai.
That's just interesting because my understanding is that once you're in that king's harem, you're not getting out. So even if she wasn't picked, she wasn't going anywhere.
That could be, but perhaps if there is somebody else, maybe at least Akhashverosh wouldn't have much to do with her if somebody replaced her.
But wasn't that already? You talked about Mesirat Nefesh and really wanting to die and be out of it. But in a way, it was a living death for her. By her going there, she'd given up any chance of any other future. And I don't think, but it was also, when you were saying about the story and I'm glad you redeemed her at the end because I was getting very worried about where you were going. I've always thought about the Megillah as being the idea that it's us, it's our generation. It's the story written at a time that there's no prophecy, there's no way to know what Hashem wants. And Mordechai says to Esther, maybe that's the reason you were put there. This is us. We never know that what we might do might be the thing that we're put here for. Look at this whole Corona year. We've been asked to do things.
But that's again, you can use that to justify almost anything. And it's
not justification. I'm not talking about justification. I'm talking about, I think the story appeals because we can all relate to that. We don't know what Hashem wants us. We can only use our best judgment. The fact that there were two beauty competitions, maybe that's Mordechai's way of saying, well, if she still wins the second one, that's a sign for me. That's what Hashem wants. Because we live by signs. We have no other way of knowing.
That could be true. That could be true. He might have been frustrated, but he might have concluded from that as well that clearly that's what Hashem wants. Marcia asked about, was she forced to be in the first beauty contest? Yes, she was, because there's also an opinion they were only supposed to take unmarried women, and at least some of those people knew that she was married, and they violated, either because, for whatever reason, maybe because Esther had this great beauty, they violated their own rules, and they took Esther even though she wasn't even eligible because she was married, and it was only supposed to be unmarried girls, unmarried maidens, women, etc. But apparently, they didn't really care. And what the king wants, the king gets. Any other comments? Or questions? There's so much here. Yes, Edna. I know you said you didn't like the fact that Esther is married.
Too hard to believe. I think it's. I don't like midrashim. And
okay.
I know
this is not a medrash. Okay. This is not a medrash, Edna. This is the Gemara. This is the Gemara in Megillah. It's not the medrash. It's an accepted Gemara. And
let me tell you something, Rabbi. I know Persians. They would never have gone for a married woman. Bitula. That's what they were looking for, and that's what they wanted.
Akhashverosh was not a pure blood, so maybe that's why. And again, we painted him as a as with this sexual appetite that he was willing to look the other way. Let's put it that way. But okay, the Gemara seems to accept that they were married. I don't know that it changes the picture completely. It just only heightens the drama. Any other comments or questions? Yes.
Sure.
Go ahead, Van, if you will. You have a question? Yeah. Go ahead.
So I don't know if it's Gemara or Midrash, but I've read several times that Esther had green skin. Did you ever hear that or read that or?
Yeah, the Medrash says she had a green skin, but I would interpret that more olive, and that is in many cultures that's a sign of beauty, right? It's a kind of a dark skin, and there's a bit of a dispute about whether Esther was beautiful physically or whether she was beautiful in terms of her personality and charisma. Certainly the fact that she was mysterious, Akhashverosh clearly found that attractive, that, he couldn't find out her lineage. And that was that air of mystery, as we've seen in so many novels, right, or movies, that certainly adds to the attraction, right? You always want what you can't have. And he couldn't have that completely. And apparently he was unable to, he didn't want to torture her, but, that certainly helped her mystique. And probably, there were other issues about it too, that, she may have been mistreated if she told she was Jewish. There's always this ambivalence of these cultures that, these cultures that seem to be very pro-Jewish, but at the same time, they can turn on the Jews at any moment. So even though Akhashverosh has this 6-month party, he invites the Jewish community to come to it. The other side of Akhashverosh is that he's obviously not very pro-Jewish. Okay.
I don't understand I don't understand why it would have been so difficult for Akhashverosh to find out who she was or what her lineage was without asking her. He doesn't need to ask her. His, his servants brought all these girls to this beauty contest. I mean, he could have just asked them, where'd you get her from? Where'd she come? I mean, I don't see what would have been the big deal for him to find out. He's got his spies, is this, is that.
You don't see it, but apparently there's also discussion about first of all, there's other questions. Why didn't Mordechai divorce Esther when all this was going on? And later on, maybe he could remarry her. I'm not going into that now, but there also was the idea that the community was kind of sworn to secrecy and not to tell anything about her. But again, I wasn't there. You weren't there. We don't know. But this is these are the facts as the Megillah presents them. That clearly
the Megillah is presented.
Know her lineage. So
your analogy to Aladdin and the princess, it's very true. The story is also presented like that.
Yeah,
it's the complexities that come out in the Gemara come afterwards, but the actual.
I'm telling you that they stole this from the Megillah.
Very simplistic, but I'm saying
the other way around.
It's a fairy tale.
No, it wasn't the other way around. I don't think. I think the Megillah came before Disney.
I think though,
it's not just a Disney
story. The story has a lot of elements that are common. Okay.
I think
Anyways, yes, Riva.
I wanted to ask, but you already brought it up, why Mordechai didn't divorce her when the first time she was called?
Because they weren't
you can look in. I'm not. There's a lot of comments on that. We don't have time to go into it now, but it's good homework for you to. And if not, offline we can discuss it more. But yeah, it's a good question. A lot of people ask that question, and that might have solved some of their problems. Maybe yes, maybe no. Certainly one of the ideas is that, it happened too fast and she was taken away and he didn't have any more contact with her. So there was no way really for him to divorce her under those circumstances because, you can't, you have to have her involvement as well. So, but there are other answers too.
Like
in any case,
they were never married in the first place.
Okay, and I know your opinion. You're against the Gemara. You want to dispute what the great people of the Gemara say, but and unfortunately, you weren't around then, or you could have just stood up and said, I won't stand for this opinion. But anyway, as I said, it doesn't completely change the picture. But I just want to emphasize, the point I want to emphasize was the tremendous sense of self-sacrifice that she's going through. This is a deep story and you have to try to understand her feelings as well. It's not simple. This is a multi-layered story. The Megillah has given rise to so many different commentaries and books and themes, and there's tremendous amount. You keep digging. We just explored one aspect. There's so much more in the Megillah. Beyond, nobody should just think it's just this simple, light, little fluffy fairy tale. It's not. It's very, very deep. I'm going to let everybody go, and we will not meet next week. Stay tuned. Bezrat Hashem, we'll meet in 2 weeks, and we'll have probably have a different time. So check that before you come on, so you don't call me and say, where were you? And everybody have a wonderful Shabbat and a Freilich Purim. And we're hopefully, Purim should be, Layehudim Haita Orava Simcha, to the Jews, light and gladness, and Pesach with our families and even in hotels. And everybody should have a wonderful Purim, Pesach, and following. And we'll see you next time.